one timekeeper, and it is none of you. And without any further ado, I'd like to invite Michael Rees to close the case for the Affirmative team.
Ladies and gentlemen, the opposition's case relied on the farcical presumption that Aboriginal people and the elites in those communities would be just as repressive and just as tyrannous as the elites in our communities. The reason that that was wrong is because Aboriginal people would found the state that they create on the notion that they might have differences that they would respect, on the notion that there might be things within those communities that those people could value that other Aboriginal people might not value, because they are not patriarchal, because they do not have the constructs that pre-exist that are about white oppression on those communities. We think that they are the people that would have the most respect for choice, the most respect for the identity being able to be developed in those communities in a way that people choose rather than is imposed upon them, because that is what they had before, and that's probably what they would want again. But moreover, we were never going to force Aboriginal people to enter those communities. We were going to give them the choice to be able to enter into a nation that they thought represented themselves, that they thought was consistent with their identity and their culture and the way that they wanted to see themselves. That is why we were proud to propose and proud to reject the paternalism that the opposition would consistently suggest. Because this debate wasn't a debate in a vacuum. It was a debate as Aboriginal people determining their own lives as compared to the current power structure, where Aboriginal people get systemically fucked on and have no right and no recourse in the current situation. First question of this debate. Does the current Australian government have a principled obligation to grant Aboriginal Australians an autonomous state? We told you that there were centuries and centuries of oppression and a systemic advantage even currently that meant that Aboriginal people would not be able to adequately represent and protect themselves in the democracy that we had. Moreover, we said that people now and forevermore will be incredibly morally liable of the injustice that has been done to the Aboriginal people. We are the beneficiaries of that injustice. Our nation gave bipartisan support to those policies in the past, and we still continue to support those policies in the present, because as we speak, there is an intervention in the Northern Territory which is damaging Aboriginal people irreversibly. But three, there is a massive failure of every current situation where we try and rectify those problems. That's all the material that Steph brought you about why land rights were and why they weren't being granted properly to Aboriginal people in a way that was actually helpful. What did we hear most recently? They said, well, pluralist democracies always preserve minority rights. If that is just farcically untrue in the case of Aboriginal people. They have a 27 times rate of carceral sentencing in our nation. They are being systemically disadvantaged in health, in education, in anything else, any other metric that you could name they are being disadvantaged under. We say in those circumstances that the pluralist democracy has systemically failed them, but moreover, that a democracy that was grounded on their self-determination and their choice and their ability to conceive of themselves as Aboriginal people and share a common identity would be one that was preferable for those people, because it wouldn't have the pre-existing power structures, it wouldn't have the dynamics or the discrimination that blight our current state. They then said, most recently, that Aboriginals have to choose to be Aboriginal or Australian under our model. First, we think that the systemic policies of oppression that we've enacted in our nation means that they probably have had to make that choice at some point in the past anyway. It has forced those two people to be different and distinct identities. But two, we think that these people being able to choose to go means that they can form their Aboriginal identity around a choice, rather than the white people saying, you are Aboriginal, you are not one of us. They can choose to opt into that Aboriginality, can choose to source it as a crucial component of their identity that is important to them. But, and finally, on the issue of people with mixed blood, we say that in the case of mixed blood, that just because, part of your parentage is Aboriginal and part of your parentage is white, doesn't mean that the validity of your choice is reduced. We say in those circumstances, for those people, it might be a difficult decision, but they might want to prioritise their Aboriginality or their whiteness in certain circumstances. We wouldn't force them to go. We would give them the choice. That choice would be valid for them. They said that if we fund them with aid, it necessarily reduced the agency of the state that we gave them. First, no, that is not how compensation works. By virtue of giving somebody compensation doesn't mean you reduce their agency. You finally give them rectified justice and give them the choice about what they want to spend that money on and how they want to form that state. But two, we are giving them an obvious increase in agency. We're finally giving them a state, finally allowing them to advocate for themselves as a people, as a group, as a collective. And that would allow them the benefit of being able to be a state and advocate for, for the ending of oppression for other Aboriginal people in other areas, in the same way as the Israeli state advocates for for the removal of Jewish oppression in other areas all around the world. What did we hear really early in their case? They said people needed a connection with their local area of land. That was the important connection for Aboriginal people. First, most Aboriginal tribes were migratory, as Dan told you. They didn't conceive of a connection to a particular white notion of a piece of land, but to the land as a notion. We say that in the circumstances, that means they don't have to be replaced on their personal piece of land, but they have to be replaced with an area of land. But moreover, that people derive connection with the land also from autonomy over that land, not the notion of just by virtue of, having been near that land or whatever, being able to control that land, being able to determine what happens on that land, the practices that occur on that land. Two, we say that in most of the circumstances that we have to be a comparative in this case, in the case that white people own a huge amount of land in other areas of Australia where they occupy that land and mean that people have necessarily been dislocated for that land, and therefore a lot of people have lost the natural connection that they would have had with their land had they not been disassociated. We say in those circumstances that by giving them the Northern Territory, we give them the opportunity to regain the connection with the land. Maybe it's not the same land that they had, but that seems to be particularly impractical in the cases of all the land in Australia really being their land. So we say in those circumstances, give them connection with some land instead of currently effectively no land. We say that that was particularly problematic. Okay, they then said that there has never been a homogenous form of Aboriginal identity, therefore these people couldn't unite. We think that the Aboriginal people have been forced to have a homogenous identity by the oppression that our state has imposed upon them. We say that that homogenous identity is a unification as an oppressed group, and we say that for those individuals that is then a valid form of identity. Moreover, we would say that the Aboriginal people themselves would know that respect for individual groups and individual agency and autonomy of the tribes within the Northern Territory that we establish would be very important, because they understand the cultural significance of practices. They understand the cultural significance of other things that other tribes might do. We say in those circumstances it wouldn't be an enormous government imposing on a smaller group of people or a large group of people. It would be a situation where they would probably have a vested interest in representing those people and making sure that those people had the autonomy that the state was principally founded upon. Finally, they said, but the current Australian population and their side is tolerant and progressive. We would say that the current Australian population is either not tolerant and progressive or is not doing enough in the circumstances given the huge systemic institutional discrimination that they face, and therefore was not particularly effective and was probably not doing enough at all. They asked, second question in this debate, would the creation of an independent Aboriginal state benefit the Aboriginal people? We said that it would give them self-determination. We said that it would allow them to do what they want and associate with the land in the way that they want, that wasn't repressive and wasn't associated with the power dynamics that currently exist in society. They wanted to say that this state will be very poor, it will lack skilled resources, it will not have an efficient economy. First, the skills needed in this Aboriginal state will likely not be the same. We don't expect them to be a thriving services-based economy. We would expect them to determine the economy in they want, the land in they want. That is the principle of self-determination. Two, we think that those people have an incentive to make that state successful because they want to see the Aboriginal people flourish. They won't be as resigned to the victimization they've received in our society, in the society that we give them, because they are proud people. Moreover, they could just probably import the skills because they would have an incentive to import some skills in some circumstances to be able to let their economy thrive. They said that we will lose capital to give aid to the Aboriginal people and lose capital to give aid to that nation. First, they are in a better bargaining position as a unified majority in an area than they are currently, where they are systemically and strategically dislocated and are always in the minority wherever they are. But two, we have a bigger incentive to help them because we don't want to see their state fail either. In many circumstances, the Australian people, some Australian people, have a connection with the Aboriginal people. Even if that currently doesn't mean that we can have a majority of people opting into that belief system, we say that some people in the Australian community would probably prefer not to see them suffer in the circumstances. But moreover, that their incentives to not see themselves suffer would be greater than any that we could ever impose upon them. That is why the Aboriginal people should be granted autonomy. That is why this debate must be assessed in the comparative to the option that they offered us, and that is why we will be successful.